everybody, buckle up. We're about to venture into Ironwood insanity with the Joker Bowl. And the bowl got its name because I often see things. The first thing I saw when I looked at this was the Joker, and Jack Nicholson's the Joker in particular. And then I thought, ooh, maybe the Batman symbol. And then I thought, oh, maybe the Pringles guy. What do you guys think? Let me know in the comments. Back to the task at hand. This is a multi-branch ironwood crotch with some really interesting, funky little burly, branchy bits coming out the front. And I had no idea what to do with this in order to keep the best figure. I didn't think it was big enough in diameter to split it in half and remove the pith like you normally would. So I figured the best course of action was just to put it on the lathe and start nibbling away until I had some idea what to do with it. I don't know. I think I'm gonna make this a little bit more round and stick it on the lathe. Let's see what we've got, if anything. I cut this part out, but I put it between centers and figured out what axis I wanted to turn it on. It's not really balanced, so I have to start really slow, but I wanted to be able to make changes as I go along. I'm turning pretty slowly, only around 300 RPMs. I didn't take very much off with the chainsaw because I wanted to be able to look at it as I went along. There were so many branch inclusions and funky little bits that I knew there was going to be some amazing figure in here, and I didn't want to take a chance on having chopped it off with the chainsaw. The roughing process is even longer than normal. Not only do I have to turn it relatively slowly because it's not a very balanced blank, it's just tough sledding. There's all different kinds of variations in height and where the bark is and where the bark isn't, and end grain and branches, and it was just kind of nuts. I'm just trying to get through the bark on the bottom if I can, and then also up the side so that I can see if the cracking that was in the ends is going to go through all the way. As it gets a little bit more balanced, I'm able to turn the speed up a little bit more. I've got it around 400 now, which is a little bit better. In my attempt to keep my head out of the overhead camera shot, I have made it so that you guys can't see the end of the gouge or the edge of the bowl here, but once we get it a little bit smaller, it will be back in view from the overhead camera. We're getting there. I'm sneaking up on the end of the branch that hasn't been cut yet. And you can see I'm leaving all of those ridges in there. That's because I'm losing the bevel contact from the gouge when I'm going over the parts where the bark is and I'm not actually touching the wood there yet. Hindsight being what it is, I'm wondering what it would have looked like if I had shaped the blank like this and had it flare out at the tops rather than curving in like I did here, which made it really hard to sand and finish. It seems like I really like this calabash-shaped bowl. I tend to make them frequently. Apparently I need someone to save me from myself. So the next time I start making this shaped bowl, somebody holler at me, would ya? And here I go, I'm starting to round those wings over. I didn't find anybody living in this bark inclusion. Man, this thing is just a gnarly mess. This piece was a lot drier than I expected it to be, and I didn't see any cracking coming from the branches or any of the other places that I was worried about. So I'm deciding on what kind of a mounting method I'm going to use here, and I'm going to go ahead and try a tenon. I wasn't really sure about using a tenon on this piece. The ironwood is really dense, and it's still pretty unbalanced, even though it's rounded over on the outside. There's still a lot of wanky stuff going on the inside before we get to hollowing it. So I wasn't really sure, but I didn't have what I thought was going to work out for a glue block available, so I decided to go ahead and do the tenon. Now, I cut out the part where I made the tenon ever so slightly too big, and it just fit in the chuck jaws, but it didn't give me a good solid seat. So I put it back between centers, took the tenon down a hair, and then I'm going to remount it here. I wasn't happy with the way the tenon was sitting in the chuck initially. The tail center was putting some uneven pressure on it because I have the cup center in there and it's not flat where it was pushing up against the chuck. My tenon should have been fine. It may have been a little bit small, but it was square and it wasn't bottoming out in the chuck, so it should be no problem. I put the cone tip on the live center and that sat nicely down into the hole left by the spur drive, so I had the tenon seated good, and then I had nice even pressure coming from the tailstock, so I was able to get the speed up around 740 and commence to begin the final shaping. Oh yeah, let's round those wings way over. Oh, even more. I spent a ridiculous amount of time shear scraping the outside of this, trying to make sure that I could get it really smooth and eliminate as much of the sanding as possible because I was going to have to do so much of it by hand. I think at this point I already have 3 hours of video footage. So I'm ready to start hollowing now, and as I always do, whether it's a tenon or a mortise, I double check and make sure that it hasn't shifted in the chuck at all, that it's tight, and we're good to go. I was trying to leave the tailstock up, but I just couldn't. Everything was in the way. So I drilled a hole with the Forstner bit, not so much for depth, but to give me clearance to hollow it out. I know that I'm going to use my hollowing system in conjunction with just some round carbide hollowing tools, because using a gouge in here was just terrifying. This is a regular tip round carbide cutter. I also have a negative rate cutter that I use for more delicate work, but this is a little bit more aggressive, and I was trying to get a lot of stock removed. I'm planning to use the hollowing tool up near the edges to get the final thickness, but I'll use the larger carbide cutter to take out the bulk of the waste. Now, if y'all scare easily, hold on. kind of afraid of that. I think what happened here is that I let that channel get too deep. I had been cutting on the left side of the cutter where the purple is, and then I believe that the right side where that blue arrow is caught, and it just threw it off the lathe. The tenon was a little bit damaged, but it didn't snap off, so I think it was just a force issue. So I should have listened to that gut feeling and just figured out how to do a glue block anyway. I did have one more use left of the walnut glue block that I used when I made the Mad Eye Moody's maple burl. So I'm preparing it for that, and we'll start over. This is Lyle Jamieson's method of mounting everything that's not end grain. So if you're interested about the glue block method, I did use that in my last video, and also Lyle has very in-depth information on his YouTube channel as to how he does it. Even though it's pretty well centered when you use the glue block, I had to go back and reshape all of the outside of it. So all of that shear scraping and prep work that I did was for naught because it wasn't centered enough that I could leave it alone. I'm making sure that I come back and clear out the waste between where I'm working around the edge there and the center because I don't want to get another catch and see if I can break a glue block too. The way my lathe is situated in the shop, I can't get around the back side of it, but I put it in reverse, and that gives me a lot better access to that undercut rim, and also just lets me see what I'm doing. The joker mouth has morphed into a ginkgo leaf. There was so much vibration in this piece from all of the voids and branch inclusions and just all of the things that are going to make it a really pretty and amazing bowl, but it did make it a little bit hairy for the actual turning of it. I'm going to be going back and forth between my hollowing tool and a regular carbide depending upon where I'm at in the process. I'm not even using the laser at this point. I was just using it to get into that undercut rim. So I get that part as thin as I want it, or as thin as I think I can get it, and then I go back in with the carbide and clean up some of the rest of that. The way that the carbide is on my hollowing tool, it's set on an angle, so it actually is like a shear scrape, more like a cut. But it also means that you only are cutting on the left side of the cutter, so you have to basically clear the material to its right so that you can come in from the right and cut with the left side of the cutter. Whereas with this round cutter, you can cut pretty much anything you can touch with the cutter, regardless of what side it's on. And I think that that's what happened when I threw the thing off the lathe earlier. I'm trying to clean up any ridges that are left from the different stages of hollowing, but it's a little bit tricky with these big voids. So back and forth between the hollowing tool and the carbide cutter, and we just keep hollowing, hollowing, hollowing. There were also over 3 hours of hollowing footage, so at this point we're already over 6 hours total. There's a pretty big branch and or bark inclusion in the bottom of this bowl, and I'm hoping that it's going to be solid enough to hold together so I can finish it. I did put some medium CA glue in there just to try and help stiffen it up some. Sanding. Oh man. It took me almost 6 hours to sand this. I started over at 60 grit a couple of times because there were just scratches that kept showing up. I used every tool in my arsenal and just finally called it good. Most of the bark had come off, but it was still on in a few places, so I took a riffler file and got rid of that, and then I took a nylon wire brush and just kind of cleaned it up a little bit more. And then I took the torch to it. So I blackened the natural rim, which I think looks really cool, and sets off some of the bark inclusions really nicely. I used denatured alcohol to clean off the rest of the dusty bits after I had blown it off with the air compressor, and then I used a coat of 3-pound shellac, and to my surprise, there weren't any scratches. I couldn't see the ones that I thought were going to be there, so maybe I've just stopped looking at them, I don't know. But I sealed this all up really good, and then I brushed some on the burnt edge as well. Apparently I didn't record this, but I used Brad's tongue wax on this piece, so I put on a coat of that and I let it sit overnight, and then I went back the next morning and buffed it off by hand because I couldn't do any of that on the lathe. This piece of ironwood was among the burls that my friend Marky gave me, and he wanted me to make something cool out of it for him, so hopefully I've achieved that. I think it's pretty spectacular, and I hope that he's going to like it too. Let me know what you guys think. Hit that thumbs up button if you like this video. Thank you so much for watching. Until next time, y'all be safe out there. There's a diner down the block. Go eat something, I'm begging you. You look like a swizzle stick.